welcome back to Wednesday Night Bible Class. Y'all, it has been cold and I am so ready for spring, and I am actually ready for summer, but not too hot of summer. Texas, it gets insane. But when you're in a place where it actually has all four seasons, the winter, like a real winter, it's way too cold. Bring on the sunshine. Let's jump into our next class where we are going to be talking about King Saul, King David, kingdoms and king making. We're going to be looking at the background context of that. I am so excited for this part of our series. Let's go ahead and get right into it. I like this song, y'all. It's kind of my groove now.
With this lecture, we enter a new unit on kingdoms and king-making in Israel and Judah. Historically, this unit takes us into the first half of a period known as Iron Age II. And in the next 4 lectures, we'll cover political, religious, and economic developments that occurred between 1000 and 745 BCE.
So since this section here covers 4 lectures, I think what we might do is, for the internet class, is to maybe combine the first 2 lectures in this series and then combine the second 2 lectures in this series so that it's not so long. We're going to actually go through it here, but that may be what we do for the internet.
We'll begin the unit with the rise of David as king over Israel, and we'll close the unit in 745 because that is when the Assyrian Empire reappeared in the Levant and threatened the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Biblically, we divide this time period in 2, the united monarchy of David and Solomon from 1005 to 928 BCE, and the divided monarchies of Israel in the north and Judah in the south, beginning in 928, and they continue through the fall of the northern kingdom of Israel in 722. Turning now to our investigation of the rise of the monarchy in ancient Israel, our main source for this period is again the Bible. The Bible records the history of King David and the histories of the northern and southern kingdoms in the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings. These books are part of the Deuteronomistic history, which was written centuries after David from the perspective of the southern kingdom of Judah. What this means is that within this history, David was viewed as the model king, against whom all other kings would be measured and fall short.
And just as a reminder, from the perspective of the southern kingdom of Judah, because as we learned in way earlier lectures, like one of the first 2 lectures where we saw when and how the Bible began to be written and how it began to take shape, is that we know that when Israel was exiled to Babylon, they came from Judah, and they were the what they would call the literate of the people of Judah. And so that's why she says now that this is told from the perspective of the southern kingdom of Judah, because those are the guys who went into exile, and those are the guys who began to compile and put the Bible together. So that's what she means by that.
A group of psalms called the Royal Psalms will be another helpful source. They are written in praise of a Davidic king and possibly used at times such as the coronation of a new king. Archaeology will again prove helpful in determining when and where a fully developed state emerges within the territory of ancient Israel. So let me now introduce the main characters in today's royal drama. Saul is the first Israelite king to be crowned as a king over all Israel, but he fails to establish a dynasty when he and his heir die in battle. David, as I've just said, is not only crowned king over all Israel, but he passes the kingship to his son Solomon, and together these two men's reigns constitute what we call the united monarchy. After the death of Solomon, the kingdom splits, with the single tribe of Judah becoming the kingdom of Judah under Solomon's son Rehoboam, and the northern tribes become the kingdom of Israel under Jeroboam. The book of Judges closes with a particular...
Yeah, so we covered the end of the book of Judges in an earlier video, probably one or two videos before this one. So if you haven't seen that, spoiler alert. If you haven't read that, spoiler alert. Finish reading the book of Judges, check out that previous video, and then come to this one.
Particularly gruesome story of the murder and dismemberment of a Levite's concubine. This story that features disagreements over land rights and marriage between the Israelite tribes may contain within it a historical memory of increasingly violent disputes between the tribal territories.
Yeah, that's what I think.
A second reason why ancient Israel developed into a monarchic state may have come from the persistent threat of the Philistines. Remember, the Philistines were a group of what was known as sea peoples who arrived on the southern coasts of Canaan at about the same time that Israel began to emerge as a people living in the villages of the Central Highlands. The Bible associates them with iron, acknowledging their military superiority in this respect, and it labels them as outsiders, calling them the uncircumcised. During the time of the Judges, the Philistines were the ones who made Samson's life miserable until Samson was able to destroy the temple of their god Dagon by pushing aside the support pillars with his brute strength. Saul, Israel's first king, also battled the Philistines and experienced some success, but ultimately he and 3 of his sons, including his heir, Jonathan, are all killed in a battle against the Philistines, and it is this defeat that prevents Saul from establishing a dynasty. Finally, in the multiple traditions that the Bible preserves about the rise of King David in the house of Saul, several involve the Philistines. First, we find a young David who kills the Philistine giant Goliath with nothing more than a slingshot and then severs his head and delivers it to Saul. Later, as a young man, David wins the hand of Saul's daughter Michal by not only defeating the Philistines, but by delivering 100 Philistine foreskins to Saul as a bridal gift he'd apparently registered for. In the book of Judges, the enemies that Israel faced were always different, and the Israelites seemed to have a fighting chance against them. At some point, prior to the advent of the monarchic rule in Israel, the Philistines emerged as a more significant and enduring threat, a threat that required a different, more organized approach than what a judge could provide. When we look at the history of kingship, we can see a back and forth struggle between the descendants of Rachel and those of Leah. Significantly, none of the sons of the maidservant wives become contenders in either the priestly or the royal realms. From Rachel, we get Saul, the first king, a Benjaminite. And then from Leah, we get David, who unseats Saul and becomes the first king to successfully establish a dynasty. He is a Judahite. One thing we will see as we trace the advent of kingship in Israel is that tribal identities and divisions continue to exercise authority. The tribal leadership structure of the elders will play key roles in anointing and unseating kings, and the kingdom is conceptualized as a single house. They are all descendants of the house of Jacob. At the same time, however, the house of Rachel and the house of Leah within that larger house of Jacob, communicate the division between north and south.
I just love how King Saul and King David and his line come from Judah, who comes from Leah. I love how God uses what most people would consider the least of these, and he takes people that you would not think that he would use and just does amazing things with these people. So I love that. We looked at, in some of the videos that we looked at before, we see like one of the judges, I think it was Jephthah, who was the son of a prostitute. And who would have thought that this man would have become a judge? But God uses the people that are seemingly the least of these and makes them into great, great people. And so I love that. I love that David comes from Leah.
With the advent of the monarchy, we will also see new bases of power emerge that operate independently from the older tribal systems. These characteristics include a centralized capital city, a standing army, a system of taxation, the use of conscripted labor, monumental building projects and public work projects, royal palaces, temples, fortified city walls, irrigation systems. Another mark would be the increased use of writing, which is then linked to the development of a royal theology. The dynasty of David, which succeeds in ruling all Israel, but becomes within 2 generations a dynasty set within the single tribe of Judah. And second, I'll examine the sequential monarchies of the northern tribes that begin under Jeroboam the first. Let's turn first to David and Solomon. At the time when the first king, Saul, died, David was a military commander in his army. He traveled to Hebron, a city in his tribal territory of Judah. There, he was anointed king. But he was anointed king of Judah, his single tribe. We read in 2 Samuel 2, the men of Judah came to Hebron, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. In other words, after the death of Saul, the people reverted to their tribal territories and allegiances. In fact, one of Saul's surviving sons, Ishbosheth, was also anointed king over several tribes in the north. After 7 years of ruling a single tribe, it was the kinship-based authority called the elders of Israel who stepped in and came to David in Hebron and anointed him king over, this time, all Israel. Once anointed, David sets out to secure the allegiance of all Israel. And here is where we begin to see new structures of authority, what we have called the marks of monarchic rule, emerge alongside the older tribal structures. First, David continued to enjoy military success. Most notably, he keeps the land safe from the Philistines. He also established a new capital in Jerusalem, a city that was not associated with any tribe. He conquered the Jebusites, a non-Israelite people who controlled the city of Jerusalem, and his new capital becomes known as the city of David. David also built himself a royal palace with imported cedar from Lebanon. He then made a judicious move. He brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem and installed it in a tent shrine within the city. The Ark of the Covenant, as we remember, was the portable footstool of the Israelite deity. It housed the law of Moses that was received on Mount Sinai. It had served as the symbol, the unifying sacred symbol of the tribal alliance. Whenever the tribes had gone into battle in Joshua and Judges, the Ark of the Covenant had gone with them as a symbol of the Israelite God leading the fight. When they were not at war, the ark traveled between tribal shrines, providing a kind of equal opportunity access. By moving the ark to Jerusalem and installing it there permanently, David was able to absorb or co-opt the power of this sacred tribal cult object. He removes the control of it from the tribal hands and tribal territory. Some additional marks of monarchic rule are not achieved until David's son, Solomon, comes to power. Solomon embarks on an ambitious building plan that involves taxation and conscripted labor, while his signature achievement is the building of a temple in Jerusalem for the Israelite God. The account in 1 Kings associates him with much more. In 1 Kings 9, we read, "This is the account of the forced labor which King Solomon levied to build the house of the Lord, and his own house, and the Milo, and the wall of Jerusalem, and Hatzor, and Megiddo, and Gezer." The text continues describing store cities and stables for Solomon's chariots. Solomon is also said to have established a system of taxation whereby the land was divided into 12 provinces, each of which supplied the royal household for 1 month. One additional way to chart the development of an organized monarchic state is through the number and type of officials and functionaries that are mentioned in relationship to a king's reign. Starting with Saul, we find he had only one named official, Abner, who was the commander of his army, and not insignificantly, also his uncle. David also had a commander of his army, Joab, but he added several other officials, a recorder and a secretary, both of which point to the growing importance of writing and documentation within a royal setting. He had 2 royally appointed priests, a director of forced labor. By the time we get to Solomon's rule, we have a palace apparatus that includes an army commander, one who directed the officers, multiple secretaries, a recorder, again signaling the production of written texts, priests, a palace manager, a director of forced labor. Let's turn now to Jeroboam and the northern kingdom. The biblical presentation that we have of this story, of the division of the kingdom into 2, the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, is found in 1 Kings 11 and 12. At the death of Solomon, his son Rehoboam is set to succeed him as king of a united Israel. Now, our first hint that Rehoboam's power base may not be strong is his choice of the northern tribal city of Shechem for his anointing as king over all Israel. We would expect Jerusalem, the city of David, his grandfather. Choosing Shechem is like the Democrats choosing a southern city for their convention, or the Republicans choosing New York. You choose the city where you know you're weak, in the hopes of winning over a few to your side. So Rehoboam's choice of Shechem suggests that he is weak among the northern tribes. At the anointing ceremony of Rehoboam, a certain Ephraimite by the name of Jeroboam appears to challenge Rehoboam. Now, what we know about Jeroboam from the preceding chapters is that he had served as the head of forced labor in Ephraim under Solomon. But when his power grew too great, Solomon sought to kill him. So Jeroboam had fled to Egypt. He returned to Israel when he heard that Solomon was dead and his son Rehoboam was being anointed king. Jeroboam then leads a group called the Assembly of Israel and says to Rehoboam, "Your father made our yoke heavy. Now, therefore, lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke upon us, and we will serve you." Rehoboam buys some time by sending them away for 3 days. We then read how Rehoboam took counsel with two groups of people in order to get advice on how to respond to Jeroboam. He consults the elders who had served his father and the buddies that he'd grown up with. Now, as readers of this story, we know that the wise course of action will be the one put forth by the elders. So let's look at the advice. The elders advise Rehoboam to lighten the people's load and speak good words to them so that he'll win the people over and they'll give their loyalty to him. The buddies from his youth, on the other hand, suggest that he say the following: "My little finger is thicker than my father's loins. And now, whereas my father laid upon you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions."
I mean, were they talking smack back then? That is hilarious to me. Really? That's how they talk stuff back then?
It goes without saying that Rehoboam rejected the sound advice of his elders and followed the advice of his buddies, and it does not work out well for him. When the people returned after 3 days, Rehoboam spoke to them precisely following the script of his buddies, showing only enough wisdom to leave out the part about his little finger. The people's response shows that in moments of crisis and uncertain transition, the people reverted to the security of their tribes and of their older power structures in the village elders.
So backsliding.
The people responded to Rehoboam, "What portion have we in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Look now to your own house, David." When they ask what portion they have in David and insist they have no inheritance in the son of Jesse, they are asserting that they are not of the house of David or even of the tribe of Judah. They do not belong to him or with him.
That makes sense.
In the end, Rehoboam was forced to flee back to Jerusalem, where he began ruling over the tribe of Judah only. And Jeroboam was anointed king over all Israel, which in this case now means 10 tribes. And so when we read right after the division of the kingdom that Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day, we see the southern historical perspective that the division was a mistake, a rebellion, and what the founders intended was a united kingdom of 12 tribes under a Davidic king. When we turn to the rule of Jeroboam I, we see some repeated patterns. Jeroboam built up the capital cities of Shechem and Penuel, and perhaps most significantly, he built 2 temples, one in Bethel and one in Dan, territories that mark the southern and the northern borders of the kingdom that he hoped to control. He made 2 calves of gold to place in 2 new temples and presented them to the people. And then in a reenactment.
Y'all, what is with the calves? I'm gonna have to do some research on that and see why it is that Israel always wanted to make these calves, and they wanted these calves to represent God. That's so weird. Why a calf? So I'm gonna do some research and come back on that.
Of Aaron's sin in the wilderness, he said, "You have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." In my next lecture, we'll take a look at the role of temple building in royal ideology and the various forms of iconography, including the bull calf, that were associated with the worship of the Israelite God. Now, there are no independent references to David and or Solomon outside of the Bible that date to the late 11th or 10th centuries when these two men would have ruled. There is no independent attestation to a new kingdom of Israel in the 10th century in the writings from Egypt or Mesopotamia. Our first extra-biblical references to a monarchy in ancient Israel date to the 9th century BCE, 100 years after Solomon. The first piece of evidence comes in the form of an Aramaic inscription discovered at the archaeological site of Tel Dan in the north of Israel. The inscription refers to a king of Israel and second to something called the House of David. So the evidence of this inscription agrees with the biblical presentation of a divided monarchy in the 9th century. And it indicates that one of these kingdoms traced its origins to a figure named David. But this inscription does not speak to a time period of the united monarchy when David and his son Solomon ruled. The second inscription is much more complete. It is called the Mesha stele or Moabite stone. Like so many of our formal inscriptions on stone, this one also is a monument celebrating a military victory. The stone, which was discovered in Dibon, Jordan in 1868, comes from the ancient land of Moab across the Jordan from Israel and dates to around 830 BCE, meaning during the time of the divided kingdom. It narrates events that are described biblically in 2 Kings 3. The inscription on this Moabite victory monument is important because it refers to Omri, a known king from the Bible, as king of Israel. So this monument also serves as evidence for a divided monarchy, but does not help us confirm any details about the united monarchy under David and Solomon. Another approach in trying to use archaeology to uncover evidence for the united monarchy is to focus on the extensive building activity that the Bible credits to Solomon. Archaeologists, for example, have excavated sites outside of Jerusalem where the Bible indicates that Solomon built walls, gates, store cities, and royal stables. One promising piece of evidence for a Solomonic kingdom is provided by the excavation of gate structures in the cities of Hatzor, Megiddo, and Gezer, where Solomon is said to have built walls. Each of these cities has yielded a distinct 6-chamber gate structure, suggesting these gate structures were built at the same time and under the same building authority. Now, finding scholarly consensus on the date of these gate structures has proven extremely difficult. Some archaeologists date the gates in all three cities to the 10th century, matching them up with Solomon's rule. Other archaeologists date them to the 9th century, severing them from any possible connection to Solomon. What we've learned here is that it took time, centuries, for a monarchy in ancient Israel to emerge as a fully developed state. In its earliest form, monarchic rule did not look much different from the rule of charismatic judges that preceded it. Still, with the advent of the monarchy, we begin to see new structures of political power centered in an ever-expanding royal household that consisted of titled royal officials. The Bible remembers the united monarchy under David and Solomon as a period of national power and glory. It is a golden age. In reality, the united monarchy lasted only 2 generations and remains largely undocumented archaeologically. It is not until the period of the divided monarchies of Israel and Judah that we begin to see fully developed monarchic states. In my next lecture, we will examine one of the marks of a monarchic state in detail, the role of state-sponsored temple building in the establishment of monarchies in Judah and in Israel.
She didn't talk a lot about the story of King Saul and the story of King David. I'm not sure if she's going to get into that later, but I think there's a lot of interesting things there in that story, the story of King Saul and the story of King David. So I am going to do a video on that, and I don't know if it's going to come before this one or after this one. I'm not sure yet. Probably after. But I think that's an interesting story with some interesting things that we can learn from that story. So I will do a video on that. We learned how Israel sort of split off from Israel. The northern kingdom of Israel split off from the rest of the tribe. So they became split, northern Israel and Judah. Jeroboam became king of Judah. She didn't go into detail about that either, and I enjoy the detail of that, so I will probably also do a video on that. And we'll probably do a separate video on King David and his reign, more in depth, because she didn't really get into that. But of course, we are here looking at background and historical context, and so we don't expect her to get into all of it, but there are some things that I want to cover as well as we move along, so I will do separate videos on those. I would also like to know what you guys think about what we're learning so far. What are your thoughts? What are your opinions? What have you researched and come up with on your own? I want to hear about that. Put that in the comments for me. If you're enjoying this series or any of the other videos that we're doing, please share the videos, like and subscribe to the channel, and come back in 2 weeks.